Thank you, Senator Heinrich. I'm going to try to be respectful for everyone's schedule because you're here during sort of the screwy time of year. Senator Lee, you're up.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. It's great to have all of you here, and it's good to see my friend President Nygren again. He and I hold the alliance between Utah and Arizona in check. I was born in Arizona and moved to Utah as an infant. He was born in Utah, moved to Arizona young in life, and so it's good to see you, sir. I'm grateful, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman, for the fact that you've scheduled this hearing. This is a really important topic. As of 2018, there were about 185,000 people living with diabetes in the state of Utah alone. And this is a significant disease. It's a significant disease that presents all kinds of challenges. It manifests itself 24 hours a day. It never sleeps. And in the case of type 1 diabetics, there is no reasonable prospect of living without it. There's no reasonable prospect with technology in existence today of becoming no longer insulin dependent. It's essentially with you for the rest of your life. And so as a result of that, this causes all kinds of headaches financially, emotionally, in every aspect of your life, at every moment of your day. It can step in and cause problems. Well, the subject of today's hearing focuses on one disease. I believe my comments in some instances may be relevant to multiple conditions. I believe the federal government has itself been one of the main driving obstacles to increased innovation, and we know, of course, that increased innovation brings about higher quality, better prospects for treatment of the disease, and ultimately brings down the cost. It produces cost savings with additional competition. Sometimes when confronted with issues such as drug shortages and high costs, the government seeks impulsively to intervene through increased spending and even more regulation. But this strategy ignores the fact that such shortages and those high prices are often the result of excessive and unwise government action in the first place. It shows up all the time in the case of overregulation. It's so difficult to get approval, sometimes needlessly so, that there are fewer and fewer competitors. And it's a natural barrier to entry. Sometimes it comes about in the form of price controls. Take the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, which seeks to impose price controls on certain pharmaceuticals. Now, the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan entity that we hire to perform analyses like this, predicted that this would result in 15 fewer new drugs being launched over the next 30 years. And experts are increasingly warning that this policy will exacerbate shortages. Instead of increasing spending and imposing mandates and engaging in an even more aggressive regulatory action, in many instances, Congress just needs to buckle down and focus on addressing the excessive government intervention problem, dealing with the regulatory stranglehold that exists. And I'd like to talk about two pieces of legislation that I've introduced to address those regulations that prevent some of these innovative new treatments from coming forward and lower cost drugs from coming to market. Recently, I introduced S-2305, the Biosimilar Red Tape Elimination Act. This is a bipartisan bill that I filed alongside my colleagues, Senators Lujan, Braun, and Vance. The bill would align the U.S.'s biosimilar program along with the rest of the developed world by getting rid of the arbitrary, unwise, and unnecessary distinction between approved biosimilars and interchangeable biosimilars. Biosimilars, you see, that's a word we use that's essentially the functional equivalent of generics for complex biological drugs. The U.S. is the only country that has these two tiers of approval and interchangeability. Congress created the interchangeability designation out of concern that there might be a risk of switching from one biologic to its biosimilar, and that they might not function the same way, and that might cause problems. However, those concerns simply have not been borne out empirically. The science doesn't back them up. what we gain from the distinction is next to nothing, and what we lose is significant. And a lot of voices in the scientific community have argued that the FDA's initial approval of a biosimilar is sufficient to establish that the biosimilar is in fact interchangeable to and with its reference product. Moreover, the interchangeability designation has confused states, patients, doctors, and those who work with them by signaling that biosimilars are significantly different from their reference products. This in turn makes it less likely that they'll be available for use, that they will be used as substitutes, and the availability and use of substitutes brings down costs. And so interchangeability thus raises costs because biosimilars would otherwise provide much-needed competition for biologics. Biologic drugs make up approximately 46% of U.S. prescription drug spending, despite making up less than 1/2 of all prescriptions, just 0.4%. So when we talk about the high cost of drugs, we're often really talking about biologics, even though they're a tiny, tiny share of the overall picture. My bill would help increase biosimilar competition by declaring that all biosimilars, upon initial approval, shall be deemed interchangeable. Now, the FDA's subject matter experts have communicated to my office that the bill would align our biosimilar program with current scientific understanding and improve biosimilar approval and uptake. This bipartisan legislation would help usher in greater biosimilar competition, thus reducing prices and benefiting all patients, including and especially those with type 1 diabetes, who are for the rest of their lives dependent on insulin. Another way that I've sought to support type 1 diabetes is by exploring ways in which the current regulations simply don't make sense for innovative treatments. Treatments of the sort that could actually bring about a functional cure for the disease or something approaching that. When we just throw money at government programs, sometimes we incentivize the status quo. We lock in on existing technology. To use an analogy, if we had done that in our music listening devices, we might still be stuck in the 8-track tape world, something most people in this room probably don't even remember. We don't want to do that with healthcare, especially in an area like the treatment of type 1 diabetes, where technological advances are so important. For example, this year I was joined by Senators Budd and Blackburn in introducing S-2205, the Increased Support for Life-Saving Endocrine Treatment Act, or the Islet Act. Islets are these microorgans inside the pancreas that produce insulin. Now, patients who have type 1 diabetes don't have normally functioning pancreatic islet cells. We're not sure why, but they stop working. The theory is that there's an autoimmune condition that attacks the healthy pancreatic islet cells and kills them or causes them to be non-functional. So they routinely require these insulin injections. These treatment options are important, but they can become burdensome and expensive and cause the patient constantly to have to chase between highs and lows, which is its own form of hell. Thankfully, we do have other options and possibilities. Scientists have found ways to take pancreatic islet cells from deceased donors and transplant them into the bodies of patients with type 1 diabetes. Some patients who have received these procedures have been able to go years without either any insulin injections or any type of continuous glucose monitoring. But regulations have squashed the procedure. They've made it almost impossible. Rather than regulating islets as organs, HHS and FDA have regulated islets as drugs since 1993, despite the fact that other countries appropriately regulate islets as organs and not as drugs. We have to take care of this. We have to fix this problem. And I have serious concerns about the FDA's recent action on this. The FDA recently approved a drug for this treatment rather than going the route proposed by the Islet Act. And I'm out of time. I wish I could had more time to do this, but I do want to know eventually from the FDA, how did it decide to approve this product's biological licensing application as a drug, especially since one of their previous reports had said that the agency couldn't assure the product's attributes correlate with clinical outcomes. And how will the FDA's decision impact access to allogenic islet transplantation? Would such procedures be more affordable and accessible if islets were regulated as organs? The answer is almost certainly yes. The FDA has a lot to answer for. In this and in countless other areas, they're needlessly making this disease more expensive, more deadly, more long-lasting, simply because of their own regulatory malfeasance. Thank you.
First of all, Mr. Vice Chairman Swiker, thank